Hey everyone, welcome to the Echo Podcast. My name is Ryan Becker. It's my privilege to introduce you to today's guests. The first is Jon Daniel. Jon I met back in 2014. He's a really good friend of mine and works with me on Engage Ministries at Southern. He is studying his master's in mental health counseling, and so really excited for him on his journey. The other is a really good friend of mine and actually a business partner of mine as well, Kevin Christensen. Kevin graduated from Southern around the same time that I did in 2015. He currently works as a producer, a scriptwriter, and an actor, and he also co-founded the Scratch News with me, which is an Adventist news source for all Seventh-day Adventists and keeping you up to date with Adventist news in 5 minutes or less. And so both of them bring unique and fresh perspectives to the topics we're talking about, and so I'm really excited for you to hear from them. So welcome to Echo. Let's get started.
This episode of the Echo Podcast is sponsored by Southern Adventist University.
I just want to say right off the bat, I don't see how this could go badly at all between the three of us. I think this is going to go swimmingly. Also, I'm bringing back swimmingly as a term to describe things.
Also, I think every one of your podcast episodes that I've ever been on starts with me giggling in the background before I ever talk.
Yeah, good. So we're right. We're being consistent.
Start.
Consistency is huge for me. So this is really important. Okay, so one of the things that is just a reality in Adventism is that it can be very hard to leave the Adventist system or bubble. Yeah. This is just a reality, right? If you if you go to an Adventist university, it's likely that most of the business or job connections tend to be within Adventism or other Adventist institutions, whether that's healthcare, university work, teaching. Like it's just way easier to stay in the system, and it just becomes this natural progression. While that's good, like it does, I think to some degree, like that is a good thing.
I think it
provides
can be a good thing. Yeah, like we take care of our own in a way.
Exactly. But the difficulty is then that when we are outside of the bubble, in quote the real world, quote end quote, so to speak, that is not a shout out to any specific MTV show.
And you're wilding out here.
That can create problems for how we kind of interact with people. Mm-hmm. It can add a lot of discomfort. It can add a lot of awkwardness, and it can be just we tend to err too much on the side of like one unique trait. I don't know if you know it's unique, but Adventism is such a core part of Adventist identity, like of the identity of Adventism, that we often don't know how to talk in terms outside of that identity. Yeah.
I think a lot of times it's Adventist first, Christian second.
Yeah. I'm a X generation, this is the first part of who I am. Mm-hmm. And once again, nothing necessarily inherently bad with that being such a significant part of your identity. I do think Christian first is important, obviously, but it only becomes bad when it actively or when it negatively disrupts any relationships or connections with people outside, because the entire kind of point of Christianity is that we would talk to people outside of ourselves, right? Church is for the people who aren't there yet. And so I want to talk a little bit about that, a little bit about your journeys and my own journey in any situations that we've been outside of the bubble, whether that is we've left faith for a while, whether that's career, whether that's school. I mean, it could literally be any of those, but what faith outside of religion and outside of our denomination looks like. And why it may not necessarily, I mean, maybe you do think it's a bad thing. I don't know. Kevin, I would hope not, given the the work that you specifically do. But yeah, so let's start with the easiest thing is, whether it's now or in the past, what was kind of a standout moment in your life where you were interacting with a lot of people that weren't from, your faith tradition, right? And you can take a second to think about it, Kevin. I know that's like you ever since you graduated and even before. So, Kevin, let's just start with you.
Well, I mean, okay, it's not like I don't ever spend time with people in the bubble. Like, I show up at
You're
church
sitting at a
every-
table with two other people
Yeah,
in the
I know.
bubble.
Yeah, so I'm glad to speak with you today. It's been a long time.
Yeah,
It's such a blessing.
You
Yeah.
apostate.
No, actually, one of the funny things was that I realized was I would show up to Sabbath school on Sabbath morning, and my good Adventist friends were all at work, like for an Adventist hospital or for an Adventist, college, university, something like that. And I, like the big warning before I left was like, you may not want to leave the bubble because you're going to run into Sabbath issues. And I was like, but I'm the one here, like who has the Sabbath issues now, and I understand, we have our justifications, we have our reasons, okay, well, it's different, if you're at a hospital, you're serving, and the whole example of, your donkey falls into a well on Sabbath, you still help it out, you're healing, you're doing healing ministry. But we start nitpicking, and we start kind of I feel like we start missing the point with some of that stuff. For example, like oh, well, there's somebody who's spending all day, at a nurse's station in front of a computer screen, talking to people, checking them in as they come in. That's okay. That's deemed appropriate. We all have endorsed that. The same person or another person working for a hotel who is sitting in front of a computer screen, checking people in as they come in all day. That's not okay.
Yeah, and there's a lot of times where we just move the goalposts.
Yeah.
Right. Like that's, and for some jobs, it's like it can be a reality that they are needed, and you could argue that almost any job is a service job to some degree, it's not necessarily a bad thing that we make these exceptions, but rather the bad thing is when we constantly move the goalposts, or at least inconsistent in the application of them.
Well, and on that note, I think forgetting some of the reasoning for it, like the reasoning for not working on Sabbath, taking that time off, is it's a blessing for us. It's not a what can I do and what can't I do and what job do I take for that or not. It's taking that rest once a week. And so I think sometimes we kind of miss the point for the details. But that was a big thing that was like before I kind of left the bubble, was like, that's a big reason to not leave the bubble, is because you're going to run into that. And then I was like, yet here I am not dealing with that problem, and the people that stayed in the bubble are.
Yeah. I think working for the Adventist church is the most that I have ever worked on a Sabbath, and the least fulfilled that I have been in my Sabbaths is when I was deaning at an academy. Like,
So you're the
Sabbath
parent to a
rest,
bunch
what?
of right.
Yeah.
You're basically the parent to those kids.
Yeah,
And
40 teenage boys. Obviously, that was restful.
in your early to mid 20s.
Yeah.
That sounds like everything you would want it to be.
Spent church taking away phones. I wasn't really listening. Just like, hey, stop.
No,
doing
no, there is a sense, like, one of the most beautiful parts of Adventism is the fact that it is so interconnected, that you can walk into a church pretty much in any part of an Adventist church in any part of the world and have kind of a similar worship experience to some degree. Maybe the style is different, but we do have a lot of churches use the exact same Sabbath school quarterly and are going through the same lessons, and so you could switch from church to church, almost traveling or whatever, and still be right where you left off, which is really cool. The problem is when we get kind of lost in that or absorbed in that we don't ever step out. And
We're like the Starbucks of Christianity.
no, absolutely, exactly. To give an example, like this actually recently happened, and this is a moment that I'm embarrassed by significantly, and it just happened a year ago. And I'm someone who tends to be kind of comfortable outside of the bubble and talking with people, and yet here was a moment where I totally flubbed it. So we had a speaker from a non-Adventist speaker coming to Southern. And I went with the person who booked them to the airport to pick this person up. And this guy is a well-known speaker and artist, and musical artist. And during our drive back from the airport, I kind of asked him, I was like, hey, would you have any interest in ever being a guest on a podcast, which he hosts his own, and he has been a guest on several, but like, what is the... I asked him, like, what's the procedure for booking you? Because I wasn't going to try and take advantage of him while he was here. I just wanted to know, what is the best way to book you for a podcast? And he told me, and I said, well, hey, I just want to make sure, like, are you totally cool with, being on an Adventist podcast and whatever. He's like, man, I don't care. It's like, like what? And it was just one of those moments where like my Adventism mattered to me more than it needed to.
Yeah. I think we are. I think we are a little like, I don't know, nervous about it because if you stay in the bubble so much, you start getting this I don't know, this like fear of the outside world that like we're going to be judged. And, and I mean, part of that comes from some of the language that we use where we talk about, persecution and things like that. And so you start getting this mindset of, oh, everything is, people are going to persecute me and hate me because I'm Adventist. And it's funny because my experience has been like the opposite. Like I've had conversations with everyone from actors to I think former Playboy bunny who were like, wow, yeah, Sabbath. I actually know about that. That's a really that's a really cool thing. Yeah, you take a day off once a week, and I was like, you care about this? You're literally like the opposite of everything that I've been like. You shouldn't know about this. This is for us.
I should be telling you the good news about this, so you can change your life completely.
Yeah, and it was like I've run into the most interesting people out there that and they react so positively when you start talking about it from a positive perspective. When you look at what it's about, and you're like, okay, I'm taking a day off once a week, and I'm trying to eat healthier, and it's more than just, I diet and exercise. It's like, no, it's a mindset, and there's something off when you are, if you've ever had the experience where it's Sabbath and you're having to do something that you're like, you don't feel like that's what you should be doing on Sabbath. I don't even know how to explain it. You're just like, like something's off. Like it just doesn't. Yeah. Like you've been so wired for something, and so when you look at it from the mindset, when you talk to people about hey, it's a mindset, like it's a taking a day off once a week, it's a rest, it's a relaxation, recuperation. People are open to that, and they respond very positively to it.
I've gotten a lot of conversations randomly recently about the differences between public school and growing up and going to an Adventist academy. And one of the things, there are two common themes that I've heard. Both tend to be in favor of the public school. Number one, I was warned that all these temptations for drugs and alcohol would come to me if I went to a public school, and then I ended up drinking and doing drugs at academy. That was something that I heard, and there's a reason for that, and I'll explain it in a minute. So don't just take that as me harping on academies. That's not what I'm doing at all. But one of the other things was friends of mine who went to public school growing up. They said, yeah, actually, my public school friends, and people from other backgrounds, they had no problems accepting that I couldn't go to the big game on Friday night. They were just like, oh yeah, no, that's your Sabbath. Like, oh, why can't you go? It's Sabbath, man. I just got to be home from this time to this time. And they're like, or I can't go out to events like this. And they're like, oh, all right, cool. Well, we'll miss you, but cool. Like, do you? Where at academy there was often times where that was the exact opposite, and people would encourage you to do the thing against it. And let me be clear on why that is, because I don't think that this is the academy's fault. But this is a quick clarification, and it's an aside, but it's really important so that no one takes any of that out of context. There are a lot of kids that grow up in a very, very strict household. There are a lot of kids that grow up in with Ellen White being bashed over their heads. There are a lot of people who grew up with this kind of wrong, very legalistic picture of Adventism. And in your teenage years, when you want to define yourself and figure out what that means, there are a lot of kids that, and everyone does it in their own way, but very much so, there are a lot of kids that you want to be different from the thing you've been your whole life. And so they have a harder time accepting when you say that you are going to honor the Sabbath or not do these things. And they go, man, you've been doing that your whole life. Like, do something different. There's a different context there, and it's coming from this place of trying to find your identity and grow into who you are and figure out who you are. And it is not something that academies encourage. It's not, but this is something I need you to understand the heart of teenagers in that. I'm not saying that everyone will have that experience. I didn't have that experience. I just told my friends, don't invite me to parties just because I'm not going to go. And they respected it. That's the thing. I just drew a line in the sand. But most of the people I encountered never that was never a thing. But it was something that I've encountered more and more with people as they talk about and reminisce on their experiences, was they found it really actually surprisingly easy for people outside of the bubble to respect their beliefs and boundaries versus people inside the bubble. That was just a reality growing up. So
I know my friend Kevin, who's on he's on pentatonics. He said one of the things that helped him be really accepted for not doing stuff on Sabbath was because of the LGBT members of the group. And it was like, hey, we're different and we're not generally accepted by society, but you respect us for that. In the same way, we recognize that you're going to do some things that are you, and we're going to respect you for that. So just as we've been appreciative of you not judging us for the way that we live our life differently, we're not going to judge you for the way that you live your life differently. Now, there's a whole bunch of conversations you can get into on that, but the basic principle being, people do respect people that will live differently if they genuinely believe it. If it's like, no, this is where I stand on stuff, and I'm about this. Like, people are a lot more accepting than I think we tend to think.
I think a lot of times it depends on how you come at it too.
Yeah.
Like in that case, it sounded like there was a mutual respect there, and there was, some empathy that had been built. Whereas if you just come in and you're like, I'm not going to do this because this is how then it probably changes the tone of that conversation a little bit.
Well, and there's this, speaking of faith in the real world, so to speak, it's not that the Adventist bubble isn't the real world, but at the same time, everyone understands what I'm saying when I say that. It is a matter of not treating people as the other that we are sometimes taught, or we teach ourselves to believe they are, and coming in with that air of humility and not that air of you're wrong because you're living a life that isn't mine. Like one of the tragedies that I see in kind of run and gun evangelism, or guerrilla evangelism, as I like to call it, which is like, handing out glow tracts or books on the street and literature on the street or door to door, is like, because you never get to know the person. Like, I've been handed so many things, and like by the time I get it, process what's happened, and look back up, the person's gone. And I'm just like, man, if you took the time to get to know me, you would have known I'm already good. Like, not good, but like I got my relationship
so
with
humble
Christ.
too.
Yeah. Wow. Approaching with humility, But like, I'm a
He's
pastor.
the most humble.
I'm the most humble pastor. I'm the most pastory pastor. But no, like I already have a relationship with Jesus. Like I've been through this. I know the literature you've given me. You just wasted money, and you wasted a resource on me because you didn't get to know me, and you just assumed that the person you saw that wasn't in your church building is somehow living a life that isn't right because they're not in your church building, or because and that's what we're taught. We have to go out into the world and bring people to us. And one of the biggest lessons that I've learned is I just want to get out in the world and meet people and get to know them and value them for who they are in the same way that God values them, right? And God doesn't ask people to change before he builds a relationship, before that relationship can start, and it should be the exact same on our end as well.
I think you're set up to fail when you leave the bubble and enter the world and go to people viewing them as a project. I think when you go out to be a friend to people and you form relationships, and then it results with them asking you questions instead of you trying to, I don't want to say fake a friendship, but do what you need to do to be friends long enough that you can then begin working on them as a project. That never goes well in any relationship. I mean, you look at like dating relationships. Like, you need to be partners on things. When you start viewing someone else as a project, it's a recipe for disaster. And I think it's no different with any friendships or just even interacting with people, in the public space.
Are you saying that you're against the flirt to convert strategy?
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
Kevin, I'm really glad that you haven't noticed that I view you as a project yet.
That's good. That's good.
It speaks to how well I've been able to hide it in our years of friendship. It's working. No, so let me ask.
He just gives me a microphone and lets me talk, and he's like, he's fading off the deep end. You want to be on another podcast?
Yes.
What?
Let me preach at you.
Yeah.
What would you say is something that you have learned from a relationship that you've had with someone outside of the bubble? Not necessarily romantic, but obviously just any sort of built relationship, friendship with someone outside of the bubble. And I'm happy to start, unless one of you has.
I mean, I have a conversation from
Go.
I don't know, a couple weeks ago or so. There was an actress that had been on something I was producing, and we stayed in touch ever since. And I was encouraging her as she was getting on shows or booking other things, and we just kept dialoguing. And she had called me up at one point and was like, I just kind of need some life advice, and I hope this isn't like weird for me to. And I was like, no, not at all. And we talked things through, and we were talking about life and just kind of how do you juggle going from an opportunity here to then nothingness to then another big opportunity to nothingness, and how you deal with that. And so we formed a relationship there. We had a friendship, and we recently met up, and we were talking about things, and I don't even remember how this came up, but something involving religion came up. And she was asking about well, what is kind of your theological perspective on it? And there was something in the conversation where I started to hit the point where I was about to get on a soapbox and talk about something, and I was like, well, you probably don't want to hear my theological perspective on that. And she was like, no, I do. I really do. And I was like, I mean, if you're asking, she's like, I am asking. And I was like, oh, well, okay then. And we went into it, and by the end of the conversation, she was like, wow, my whole perspective on Christianity and just religion and everything is it's changed. And I was like, well, why? And she was like, well, I don't know, you never came across as a Bible thumper. It wasn't that you led with this. It got to the point where it was I want to know because I'm interested. The way that you've carried yourself with some of these kinds of things, I'm curious. And as she opened up, she was explaining her experience with being tossed around the foster care system, and some of the guardians, I won't call them parents, the guardians that she had raising her were religious, and they weren't good. And so she associated it with that. She's like, clearly, because they were crazy, only crazy people go to religion. And so seeing someone who just wasn't crazy, clearly she hadn't spent enough time with me yet, but
visibly,
that changing the perspective. And that's where I think, the way that we live our life, we don't have to walk out with a big, I am a Christian t-shirt, or walk out being, openly raising your arms to heaven to pray or something, or it doesn't have to be big and bold. I think just the way that you live your life, if you're treating people like a Christian, because the way that she said it, she said, I just appreciate how you've been here for me. You've never really asked anything of me. You've just been supportive. And she's like, you're just I appreciate that you've been a good person. I guess a good Christian. And it was the first time I'd ever heard, and I was like, well, because I will be honest, I don't feel like I'm a Badventist, very much a Badventist. I don't feel like a good Christian. I feel like someone who is constantly messing up, constantly failing. But at the end of the day, I strive to have the relationship with God, and I just pray, hey, let me be a light in the world wherever that is. Because I'm far from perfect, but let me be that. And the relationship that I saw there was, you being a good Christian, or you being just a nice person, not expecting something out of me. I guess I relate that with Christianity. Oh, that's what a good Christian looks like.
Huge. John, what about you?
Well, before I get into that last part just reminded me of something that a friend of mine told me. It was right when I was leaving deaning. It was in my last couple months as a dean, and I was struggling because I was applying for a job that was outside of the bubble, and turns out my resume to other Adventists looks really good, but it does not translate outside of Adventism. When you tell people you're a dean, they think you're a lot smarter and have a master's degree than just some guy who didn't even have a bachelor's degree and was hanging out with kids all the time. It's just kind of different. But my pastor took me aside and he was like, dude, I'm actually jealous of you. And I said, what? What do you mean? What are you talking about? I don't even know what I'm doing in my life. And he said, I'm tired of being a light bulb in a light bulb factory. I'm ready to go be a light bulb where a light bulb is actually needed. And it's really easy to be a light bulb in a light bulb factory. You know, it's easy to stay inside that bubble, but like that's not where you need to be.
Yeah,
a lot of times.
No, that's huge. You know, one of the biggest things that I learned was actually from a friend of mine who completely left Adventism. To this day, not at all even a Christian, just atheist. But we're super close friends, and he is someone who I've respected for years. And we used to have the arguments of me trying to bring him back and, you know, don't leave and whatever. And then he used to be militant in his atheism and go, no, you shouldn't stay. Like, you should leave. And it became this constant battle of, you know, disprove or prove God. And finally, it was finally when we got to the point that we respected each other enough to not do that anymore, that's when our friendship really began to grow from there. And we were able to, like, he'll text me questions. Hey, you know, I encountered someone talking about this Bible verse the other day, and I'm just curious, what is the Adventist opinion on this, or what is your opinion on this? And I'll go to him when something happens in faith, because I want his perspective on it. Because one of the things that I've really realized or learned is, this is going to sound obvious at first, but like some of the stuff we do is really, really cringy inside the bubble. like really, really cringy. And I didn't really start to see those things until I started interacting with worldviews outside of Adventism. And honestly, like, one of the greatest sources of that has legitimately been Reddit, for better or for worse. You have to be careful with that website for sure. But just seeing how the things that Christianity does often come across. And don't get me wrong, I know, like, spiritual things are spiritually discerned, but like there are some things that don't need to be spiritually discerned to be cringy or to be objectively bad. And some of our efforts and initiatives are done out of the best intentions, but look weird and to the outside, and it's really made me sensitive to, as Ty Gibson would put it, see ourselves through the eyes of an atheist. And it's really helped me shape how I do ministry, how I interact in the bubble and out of the bubble, is to understand. I almost see things from the atheist perspective before an Adventist perspective, and part of that is just to check myself to make sure I'm doing, you know, one good example of this, and this is not at all, like, I'm not harping on anyone necessarily, and I get this, and I love that we've done this, but like, I love what it is. I just wish we had chosen a different initialism for it, but the Adventist total mission involvement, the initialism for that, which, by the way, the difference between an initialism is just initials. An acronym is when a word spells out something, but initialism. So this is an initialism, and total mission involvement is TMI. And TMI is too much information. It's like there's.
So we need to embrace TMI.
Yeah, we need to embrace TMI. Like, it just comes across weird because the world outside of ourselves interacts with that initialism completely differently. And so it's that, like, I'm not criticizing total member involvement. I said that wrong from the get-go. But I'm not criticizing total member involvement as an idea or an initiative. I just wish we'd chosen a different initialism for it. That's all. But I love total member involvement. I love the idea of it. I love getting more lay people involved in ministry and not just relying on pastors. So I'm not at all harping on Adventism here. I just think there are times that we do things and we could do things a little bit more effectively.
But I think it's funny because I think that's the perfect example, TMI. Because when we're in our bubble, we see it's a lot of the Adventisty things. We're like, oh, this makes sense. I see it this way. Yeah, this is something we need to embrace. And the same thing that we see as, like, so good for the world comes across a completely different way for the world. When we're there, like, yeah, TMI. What does it come across as? Too much information. It's there's, like, not enough relationship there, and it's too much just information pouring out. Instead of, let's form the relationship, and instead of trying to walk out with bullet points ready, it's wait for the questions to come in.
Yeah. One of the biggest lessons I've learned in podcasting, and it's recent, actually, just in general, across all the shows, I've started to do this now, is to not ask someone to tell me about themselves, but rather, as the episode plays out, the audience gets to know you by your perspectives, by what you share, by stories that come out, by the people you've interacted with, right? Like, and that's how relationships work. Yes, you can tell me about yourself, but at the same time, you're going to get to know people based on your interactions with them over time and building that relationship, which is so huge. So I do want to end on this kind of last question, which is, what's the first step that you would encourage someone to take to get out of the bubble a little bit? Not to leave it. Like, we're not saying like leave Adventism, but like, what is the first step you would encourage someone to take? I know that's a hard one.
Oh, baby steps. Baby steps.
So your first step
Maybe
is a baby step.
Yeah, maybe go hang out with somebody who has similar views. Go hang out with just other Christians, and you'll start to find that there are a lot of similarities. I remember when I first started hanging out with one of my friends, I was expecting, there were 3 of us hanging out who were at least grew up Adventist, and then there was one person who is not Adventist, and we were expecting to have these very different views on things, very different perspectives, and like the way that we were raised to be different. And turns out, nope. Like, they went to church on Sunday, we went to church on Saturday, but all 4 from very conservative Christian homes. And I was like, oh, your experience is a lot like mine. Like,
yep,
that's really cool.
That's awesome. Kevin, what about you?
I think don't be a missionary, be a friend. Find a place that you can go where you're going to be with people where you have similar interests. So if that's, I'm really into board games. Hey, find a local bar, downtown that has a game night. And you can go and hang out with people, and you can play games. You don't necessarily.
You don't have to drink,
right? You don't have. They have soft drinks there too, and do. Water. I know it's shocking, but
no. In high school, I spent all of my time going to concert. I broke a rib crowd surfing my sophomore year of high school because I got dropped. But I encountered some of the most beautiful and just beautiful personalities and people. Some of the kindest people, just incredible. The kind of people that I met that are just so different from one another. It amazes me. I'm so grateful for that time, even if it was spent making decisions that I probably shouldn't have been making. Just for the experience with people that I had, that's huge. So yeah, I would encourage that as well.
So finding something where you have something in common, like an interest, because whatever it is that you're passionate about, and you go and you find people that are also passionate about that. You're there because you have a mutual interest in that same passion. For me, that's the world of like television and film. I'm really passionate about storytelling. So being with other storytellers, being with other people that are doing that, it's really cool. And then in the course of conversation, because we already are there based on a mutual interest, we start to see, okay, what are these other things that maybe you have a little different than me, but are intriguing? Yeah. And that's where the questions come about.
There's the baby step that I would encourage people to take, or the first step I would encourage people to take, is identify the people that are already in your life that are outside of that bubble, and do something that you may not have ever done before, which is ask them about it. Like I have a best friend who is not a Christian at all, not any form of Christian. Her family is Muslim. Like, go to your Muslim friend, go to any friend outside of Adventism, and just ask them. Honestly, you could do this for Adventists too, but ask them, like, hey, can you tell me a little bit about your beliefs and, like, what your life is, what was your childhood? The same way we ask other Adventists what your childhood was like. Like, ask them and care about their life. And what you may find is they may ask the same questions back. Turns out that caring about people instead of seeing them as projects makes them care about you too. And I would encourage that. And I do think that is 100% rooted in the way that Christ treated people. Christ saw them as human first. In fact, the only time that he got angry in the Gospels is when people were being mistreated by the system, by the institution, or just by each other. But I think of the woman at the well, where he talks to her about her life first. Now, he does it being Jesus. He kind of tells her a little bit about her life and is able to talk with her that way. But the idea of bringing in a broader context into his connection with them, like, that's huge. And I do think that is definitely rooted in I think this idea of really meeting people where they are at, and having a good time with them, and just building a relationship with them is 100% rooted in Christ. And I would encourage too, if a bar isn't necessarily like, oh, I'm not ready for that, or I'm like not okay with that suggestion.
Let that not be the one thing that people take out of this.
No, that's what I'm saying.
Kevin said go to a bar, but don't drink.
This is
no longer invited on the podcast.
You're out of the bubble. You've been kicked out.
The shunning.
What I would say is there's also gaming shops where you can buy board games or card games or video games. I've gone to Super Smash Brothers tournaments like locals in Chattanooga before. There are meetups on the Meetup app that you could go to, play tennis with people, play soccer, basketball, like going to the gym. There are any number of ways that you can go somewhere and have common ground with the people that you're with and build relationships over time. I was playing tennis at a place when I used to live in South Carolina. I was playing tennis at a place for months with a weekly meetup group. And it was only after a few months of playing with them every week, sometimes twice a week, that I started to actually then make kind of individual, as the kids would say, play dates with different people.
What kids say that?
As the kids' parents would say, play dates.
Not all of us were in the same
Not
bubbles.
all of us were in the same bubble. But like times where I'd make individual times to hang out and play tennis and have a good time, right? That's where those relationships were fostered. Then I moved away. But that's neither here nor there. But those are the steps that you can take of finding external common ground with the interests that you already have. Hiking groups, running groups, biking groups, diet and exercise groups, join a cooking class, there's pottery class. Like there's so many things that you can do, especially if you're in an urban environment or in the suburbs. Like there's so many different things. A dog walking group.
Just weekend meetups. I mean,
absolutely.
Just fun things that you find in common with other people.
Yeah, or go to a bar. Thank you, Kevin.
A juice bar.
Thank you, Kevin. No, but here's what I want to say to end this and close this out. I do hope that everyone understands that anything that we've said that does seem as a criticism to Adventism or to the bubble, we don't hate the bubble. We are a part of it and very much a product of it to some extent. And there's a reason all three of us are still here. I'm a pastor. Kevin and I work on projects together for the Adventist Church, and are very, very invested in creating things that Adventists can engage in and find, comfort and home in. Jon, you work with me on a huge ministry going to Adventist events in churches, and there's no part of us that is denying our Adventist identity. I think the thing that we're all encouraging here is not to let Adventism be the total sum of who you are, and to not think it has to be the total sum for everyone else around you, and to just love people, which is what we are called to do. So Kevin and Jon, thank you guys so much for sharing your opinions and perspectives here. And thank you for the experiences that you have had as well. And to anyone listening, we hope that you found something that you can help with, or something that helps you with your journey. And we hope that...
TMI.
Thank you, Kevin. We hope that never let your friends on a podcast. We hope that you never let your friends on a podcast. That is number one. But... we hope you found something you can resonate with. And if there is something in this episode that you didn't sit right with you or whatever, one of the things that we encourage is conversation. So feel free to reach out to us and let us know. I'm always game for a conversation. We'll just put Kevin's social media on blast for him, and then you can reach out to him personally. But no, thank you for being on this journey with us. Thank you for being patient with us as we navigate these conversations, and we'll see you next time. So much for listening to Echo and for being on this journey with us. If you're watching on YouTube, we hope that you'll leave a comment, subscribe, hit that like button. If you're listening on iTunes, Spotify, or whatever podcatching app that you like the most, we hope that you'll hit that subscribe button, that you'll leave a review, and that you'll engage with us. And also for more content from Project Refresh that's like Echo and some of the other shows that we host, then head on over to theprojectrefresh.org. Thank you so much for your support. It means the world to us, and we'll see you next week.